Deep in the Carpathian Mountains, there stands a shadow of history. Chaktic Castle, the ancestral home of Countess Elizabeth Báthory. Official history often dismisses her as a mere legend, a figure of Gothic horror, claiming she was a madwoman who bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. That is the comforting myth that the royal houses wanted the world to believe. The terrifying truth is that Elizabeth Báthory was not an isolated lunatic. She was a product of the highest aristocracy, protected by the powerful Báthory and Hungarian noble families, whose influence shielded her systemic, murderous cruelty for decades. Her crimes were not just acts of madness. They were an open secret of the European elite. We are not here to talk about a myth. We are here to talk about forensic history. We have uncovered the shocking testimonies of over 300 witnesses, the meticulous records of her torture instruments, and the reasons why, when her reign of terror finally ended, she was imprisoned, but never formally tried or executed. Her royal blood was deemed too sacred to spill, even after she was convicted of murdering hundreds of innocent girls. The greatest secret of the Báthory saga is that the crimes weren't committed in isolation, but in a systematic, ritualistic pursuit fueled by a rare, terrifying medical condition passed down through her famous, corrupted bloodline. Don't you dare look away. Watch this entire deep dive documentary and subscribe to this channel, and you will learn the one secret genetic flaw of the Báthory dynasty that historians believe drove Elizabeth to sadism and murder. The beginning of her murderous obsession wasn't a bath of blood, but a cold, calculated lesson in torture taught to her in childhood. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful and wealthy families in Hungary. Her lineage was a tapestry of European royalty and brutal military commanders, but the Báthory name was stained not just by power, but by a known history of madness, epilepsy, gout, and incest. This was the toxic inheritance that shaped her psyche. From her earliest years, Elizabeth was exposed to the casual cruelty that was commonplace among the aristocracy. She witnessed public executions and barbaric punishments as routine entertainment. More tellingly, Báthory was raised on the family estates where her uncle, a notorious military commander, was famous for his sadistic torture chambers. It is whispered that Elizabeth as a child was not shielded from these acts, but rather exposed to them as a form of education. A more profound influence was the history of incest in the Báthory line, particularly the repeated marriages between close cousins. This inbreeding is believed by historians to have contributed to the neurological and psychological instability that plagued the family, including Elizabeth's own severe, sudden seizures in childhood. The trauma of these attacks, combined with the environment of casual torture, created the foundation of her adult sadism. Her marriage at age 15 to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, known as the Black Hero of Hungary for his bravery and brutality, only accelerated her descent. Nadasdy, often away fighting the Ottoman Turks, was himself a sadist who reportedly taught Elizabeth new and elaborate methods of torture, viewing it as a suitable pastime for a noblewoman. He gifted her a collection of torture instruments, unknowingly sanctioning the monstrous path she would take. But the true obsession, the fatal flaw that led to hundreds of murders, began not with the desire for youth, but with a simple, agonizing accident. The popular legend claims Elizabeth Báthory began murdering to bathe in the blood of virgins to retain her beauty. While the bathing did occur, the true origin of her obsession was far more simple, agonizing, and almost accidental. The event occurred around 1602. Báthory, enraged by a mistake made by a young chambermaid while dressing her, struck the girl violently. The blow was so forceful that it drew blood, which splattered onto Elizabeth's hand. Báthory, fastidious about her skin, quickly wiped it off. But in that moment, she had a sudden, terrifying realization. Where the maid's warm blood had touched her aging skin, it looked smoother, almost rejuvenated. This was a moment of neurological breakdown and obsession. Her mind, already corrupted by her family's history and her husband's teachings, fixed upon this single, traumatic sensory input. She convinced herself that the blood, specifically the life essence of young, healthy girls, was the antidote to her own decaying beauty and her family's genetic sickness. The initial victims were low-ranking servants, easily replaceable and disposable. Nadezhda, still alive at this time, was aware of her cruelty toward servants but failed to see the escalation toward murder. He sanctioned only the punishment of unruly staff, but upon his death in 1604, Elizabeth was unleashed. She inherited his vast wealth, his fortress, Countess Castle, and, critically, his political immunity. The Countess was now free to pursue her murderous obsession without the restraint of a husband or the fear of immediate public reprisal. The most horrifying tool used by Báthory was not a knife or a sword, but a secret, agonizing device that was engineered purely for ritualistic blood collection. The terror of Countess Castle was the systematic, industrialized nature of the torture. Báthory was aided by 4 trusted accomplices: 2 maids, a nurse, and a dwarf. They ran the torture chambers with the terrifying efficiency of an assembly line of death. While she utilized common methods like needles, hot irons, and freezing water, her most infamous tool was a device that has been censored from many historical accounts: a specially constructed automated torture device designed not to kill, but to collect blood. This was a variation of the infamous Iron Maiden, but engineered for a specific, gruesome purpose. The device was reportedly a metal enclosure lined with razor-sharp blades that could be slowly tightened around the victim. The blades were positioned to pierce deeply without immediately killing, allowing the blood to flow into a specially designed drain and collection basin. This ritualistic method confirms that the murders were driven by a profound ceremonial need: the need to collect the life essence of the victims in a clean, contained manner. As the local supply of peasant girls ran out, Báthory grew bolder. She began luring the daughters of the lesser nobility to her castle under the guise of educating them in courtly manners. These young noblewomen, though higher in social status, were ultimately deemed more valuable for her ritual, confirming her belief that the higher the bloodline, the more potent the cure for her own genetic decay. But the real reason her crimes were ignored for decades was a secret pact made between the Báthory family and the reigning king of Hungary. A deal sealed by war and money. For nearly 20 years, the rumors of vanishing girls and screams coming from Countess Castle were rampant in the countryside. Why did no one intervene? The answer lies in the chilling nexus of power, debt, and royal blood. At the time, the Kingdom of Hungary was embroiled in constant warfare with the Ottoman Empire. King Matthias II was perpetually in debt and relied heavily on the loyalty and, more importantly, the financial contributions of the powerful Hungarian nobles. The Báthory family was one of the wealthiest and most influential. The Báthory family, through their vast landholdings and military support, essentially bought Elizabeth's silence. King Matthias II simply could not afford to execute or even publicly disgrace one of his most powerful benefactors. An official investigation would have plunged the nation into political chaos and alienated the nobles whose money he desperately needed for the war. For years, the king received detailed, horrifying reports of the countess's activities, yet did nothing. He allowed the murder of hundreds of citizens to continue because the political price of justice was too high. The aristocracy's belief in the sanctity of royal blood was absolute. The blood of a countess was deemed far more valuable than the combined blood of hundreds of peasant girls. This was the ultimate betrayal of the crown. The investigation was finally launched not because of a moral awakening, but because of a devastating mistake Báthory made, a single fatal error that directly threatened the king's own financial interests. The King of Hungary, Matthias II had ignored the screams and the missing girls for 20 years. The law of fratricide in the Ottoman Empire was a calculated brutality. The silence around Báthory was simply a cynical financial bargain. But Elizabeth Báthory made one fatal, arrogant mistake that finally forced the crown's hand. In her later years, the Countess, blinded by her immunity and her mounting paranoia, began to seize and confiscate the lands and property of the lesser nobility who lived near her estates. These noble families, unlike the peasants, had direct access to the king's court and the financial means to hire powerful advocates. Crucially, they were the king's creditors. When Báthory seized the properties of several key noble families, King Matthias II realized the true danger. If he allowed the Countess to continue her unchecked rampage, he would alienate the very financial base that funded his war against the Ottomans. The price of protecting Báthory had suddenly exceeded the cost of arresting her. The issue was no longer one of morality. It was one of high treason against the royal treasury. In 1610, Matthias II commissioned his cousin, Count György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, the highest judicial official, to launch a discreet but thorough investigation. Thurzó, a respected nobleman who was himself related to Báthory, was given a single chilling mandate: gather enough irrefutable evidence to neutralize the Countess, but do not, under any circumstances, shed royal blood. The investigation was a political purge disguised as a moral crusade. The greatest secret Thurzó uncovered was the chilling fact that Báthory was not merely murdering servants, she was running an organized, systemic network for procuring human beings. Count Thurzó's investigation was swift and terrifying. His team, led by notaries, spent weeks gathering over 300 witness testimonies. The witnesses included peasants, local clergy, and, most critically, former castle staff who had managed to escape or been dismissed. Their collective testimony painted a picture of medieval horror unmatched in European history. The witnesses confirmed the full scope of Báthory's sadism: the burning of victims with hot irons, the freezing of girls naked in the winter snow until they died, the mutilation with needles driven under fingernails, and the systematic beating with iron rods. Crucially, the witnesses confirmed the ritualistic nature of the murders. They testified to the presence of the collection basins and the use of the blood in the Countess's bizarre beauty regimen. The servants confirmed that the murders escalated rapidly after the death of her husband, Nadasdy, and often followed patterns: a fit of rage, followed by a ritualistic cleansing. The castle staff described a secret underground passage where the bodies were often dumped, confirming the mass scale of the operation. The scale of the murders was staggering. While official estimates focus on 80 victims, the testimonies provided by the witnesses and later destroyed records point to a number closer to 650. The investigators found several bodies and body parts buried in the castle grounds and surrounding fields, confirming the physical evidence of the atrocities. But the most damaging testimony came from the Countess's own trusted accomplices, the women who betrayed their mistress for a horrifying promise of freedom. The true keys to the torture chambers were not the locks, but the minds of Báthory's four main accomplices: Jo Ilona, Dorothea Semtes, Katharina Benica, and Fichko, the dwarf. These individuals were essential to the system. They procured the victims, managed the torture instruments, and cleaned up the blood and the bodies. Thurzó's investigators quickly arrested the accomplices and subjected them to brutal questioning, likely including torture, which was legal at the time. Their confessions were swift, detailed, and devastatingly complete. They described the murders, the disposal, and the Countess's personal methods. They threw the full weight of the blame onto their mistress. The terror of the accomplices' confessions revealed a final, monstrous secret. Báthory was not driven solely by vanity. The accomplices testified that she would often engage in acts of sexual torture and extreme psychological torment, suggesting a deep, profound sadism that went far beyond the simple desire for youth. The blood ritual was a cover for a deep, psychotic need for cruelty. But the fate of the accomplices was not the same as the Countess. Thurzo executed them in a brutal public spectacle, an act that served a terrifying political purpose. While the Countess's trial was politically impossible, the punishment of her accomplices was politically necessary. Thurzo understood he had to satisfy the outraged public and the lesser nobility without shedding Báthory blood. The fate of the four accomplices was immediate, public, and horrifying. In January 1611, the three women and the dwarf were subjected to one of the most brutal judicial punishments of the era. They were all found guilty of witchcraft and murder. The women were mutilated, having their fingers pulled out or torn off, and then publicly burned alive. Fitzko, the dwarf, was spared the fire, but was decapitated. This public spectacle was a political masterpiece. It allowed King Matthias II to claim that justice had been served, satisfying the masses that the perpetrators of the horror had paid the ultimate price. It allowed Thurzo to conclude the investigation, proving that the crimes were the result of a few evil servants, while protecting the reputation and the financial assets of the powerful Báthory family. The crown sacrificed the servants to save the noble bloodline. But the true fate of Elizabeth Báthory was more terrible than execution. She was sentenced to a lifetime of silent, suffocating imprisonment, a fate that proved the sanctity of her royal blood was absolute. Elizabeth Báthory was never formally tried. The political cost was too high. Instead, Count Thurzo sentenced her to perpetual solitary confinement within her own Choctaw castle, effectively buried alive. The order was simple. She was to be locked in her own chambers, and the doors and windows were bricked up. Her prison was a single room, devoid of sunlight, with only a small opening left to pass food and waste. The silence was absolute. This was the ultimate psychological torture, a private execution designed to protect the public image of the Hungarian aristocracy. Her blood would not be shed, but her existence was erased. The official narrative that was immediately disseminated was that Báthory was a tragic figure who had merely fallen ill and died shortly after the investigation. The full horror of the hundreds of murders was deliberately suppressed and relegated to rumor, protecting the integrity of the royal bloodlines across Europe. Elizabeth Báthory lived for 4 more years in this silent prison, dying in 1614. Her death was almost as shrouded in secrecy as her life. The final hidden truth about her demise suggests that even her bricked-up imprisonment was violated by the one force that had always protected her, the cold, calculating power of her own family. We have traced the horror from the seat of sadism to the bricked-up walls. But the story isn't over. The final 5 blocks will reveal the terrifying genetic curse of the Báthorys and the secret medical fact about her death that her own family concealed. The madness of Elizabeth Báthory was not an isolated incident. It was the terrifying climax of a deep genetic flaw within the powerful Báthory bloodline. We return to the truth of her lineage, a family plagued by rampant incest, where the constant intermarriage between close cousins was a political tool to consolidate power, but a biological disaster. This incestuous history resulted in a high prevalence of severe hereditary illnesses within the family. Elizabeth herself suffered from violent chronic seizures, epilepsy, from childhood. This neurological condition, combined with the extreme sadism of her environment, is the key to understanding her escalation from cruelty to ritualistic murder. The seizures, especially those involving the temporal lobe, can trigger severe psychological changes, including hypersexuality, aggressive mood swings, and a profound detachment from empathy. Historians and psychologists theorize that the blood rituals were not merely about vanity, but about a desperate, psychotic attempt to cleanse or rejuvenate her own corrupted bloodline, believing that the life essence of healthy young girls could counteract her inherited sickness. Her madness was a horrifying echo of her family's centuries-old genetic choices. The crown that shielded her was also the source of her devastating instability. But the most disturbing discovery made by Thurzo's men in the castle was the secret, meticulous journal kept by Báthory, which contained not just names of victims, but detailed, almost scientific observations about their pain. While official records were destroyed, surviving testimony from the investigators confirms the existence of a personal journal kept by Elizabeth Báthory herself. This was not a diary of political thoughts. It was a cold, meticulous record of her crimes. The journal was a terrifying window into a sadistic, methodical mind. It contained detailed lists of victims, often including the date, the method of torture, and the specific result. This was not the work of a person acting on blind, passionate rage, but a systematic, almost scientific experiment in human suffering. Báthory was obsessed with quantifying pain. The journal reportedly contained precise notes on how different torture methods affected the flow of blood, the duration of consciousness, and the resulting emotional response of the victim. This scientific approach to sadism underscores the truth that her actions were not merely impulsive. They were a ritualized study of human agony performed by an educated noblewoman who had transformed her immense wealth into a private laboratory of horror. The journal was immediately seized by Count Thurzo and was ultimately censored or destroyed by the royal family, who understood that such a methodical record would permanently disgrace the entire Hungarian nobility. The king protected the bloodline, but he could not protect the dark intellectual reality of her monstrous mind. But the most chilling fate of all was reserved for Báthory's personal staff, who were spared execution. A hidden punishment worse than death was inflicted upon them. After the public execution of the 4 main accomplices, the remaining staff of Countess Castle who had witnessed the horrors, guards, servants, and minor attendants, were not imprisoned or executed. They were subjected to a different, more psychological form of imperial vengeance, silence, and social annihilation. These former staff members were released back into their villages, carrying the unspeakable secret of the castle. However, they were shunned, feared, and deemed permanently unclean by their communities. They were the walking ghosts of the Countess's cruelty, unable to speak of what they had seen for fear of immediate execution for treason, and unable to find peace in their own homes. They were forced to live as outcasts, their lives ruined by the proximity to power. This was the silent mandate of the crown. The witnesses must be neutralized without the cost of a formal trial. The common people were left to police themselves, ensuring that no one ever spoke the full truth about the royal monster who was protected by the king. The silence was absolute. But the ultimate insult to justice was revealed in the final dark secret of Báthory's own family. The one act of betrayal that secured her wealth even after her death. The entire investigation and subsequent life imprisonment of Elizabeth Báthory were driven by a single, terrifying goal: to punish the individual without damaging the family's immense wealth and political power. When Báthory was imprisoned, her vast estates, lands, and assets were immediately placed in temporary crown custody. However, her children and remaining family immediately entered into a fierce, cold-blooded negotiation with King Matthias II. They successfully argued that since Báthory was never formally convicted of capital crimes, as there was no trial, her fortune could not be legally confiscated by the crown. They insisted that the property must remain within the Báthory family. The king, burdened by debt and the political chaos, agreed to the final grotesque bargain. The crown seized some minor assets, but the vast majority of the Báthory wealth was returned to her children and heirs. The true price of the Blood Countess's crimes was paid not with money or justice, but with the lives of the poor. The aristocracy successfully used their power to protect both the royal blood and the immense royal fortune. We have witnessed the life, the crimes, and the political protection of the Blood Countess. Now, for the final chilling verdict, we must address the truth about her death in the bricked-up cell. Elizabeth Báthory died in her bricked-up cell in Countess Castle in 1614 after 4 years of complete solitude. The official cause was natural illness. Yet, the truth, as always, is far darker. Her death was entirely too convenient for the Hungarian noble families. Historians suspect that her final moments were overseen not by indifferent jailers, but by members of her own family. Her silent execution was likely achieved by poison or deliberate starvation, arranged by her children and relatives who were eager to secure the final legal transfer of her immense fortune and close the terrifying chapter of the Báthory scandal forever. She was murdered in her own prison, an execution carried out not by the state, but by the family she had disgraced. The Blood Countess was a monster, but she was a product of the cruelty, the genetics, and the political corruption of her time. The crown of dread protected her until the moment she threatened their financial stability, proving that in the end, blood mattered less than money. We have revealed the entire horrifying truth, but now we turn the final question to you, the crown of dread audience. Elizabeth Báthory's sadistic cruelty was protected by the king because the cost of her arrest threatened the stability of the entire kingdom. Do you believe that the king's decision to sacrifice hundreds of peasant lives to protect the greater financial and political stability of the empire was an act of necessary statecraft or the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal of his people? Let the world know your verdict. Drop your opinion in the comments below. Subscribe to Crown of Dread for more hidden history, and join us next time as we unearth the terrifying stories of blood and betrayal from the heart of the Spanish Inquisition.